Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, well-known commentator and really been a close follower of what's happening on the telecom 2G scam. Paranjoy, good to have you with us again on the issue of 2G.
Thank you, Praveer.
The cases are now in court. Number of people have gone behind bars, at least temporarily, including Kanimori, Raja, 5 key people in the business houses which got this 2G license. Do you think this has happened because of the Supreme Court pressure, or do you think finally people's pressure has caught up with the government and they're taking steps?
I think the fact that you have so many high-profile individuals and people who were holding influential positions. You forgot to mention the former secretary to the Department of Telecommunications, Siddharth Behura. The fact that you have representatives of big business houses, that you have some important business tycoons themselves behind bars, is significant because the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation, is acting independently.
Why do you think it's acting independently?
Now, it is acting independently because the court, the Supreme Court of India, the highest court in this country, on the 16th of December categorically told the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate that no matter how big that person is, no matter how influential that person is, no matter how powerful that individual might be, go ahead and investigate. And you will not be influenced by any agency, by any organization, any government body. So I think this sent a very, very clear message to the CBI. So the CBI is acting independently. It's free of political interference. I think that's the primary reason why we see so many important people behind bars. And there's one other point I want to make in this context. You have to remember that until the Supreme Court started monitoring the case, nothing was happening.
Absolutely.
The CBI had registered its first information report against quote-unquote unknown persons way back in October 2009. For the first 6 months, very little happened. Just a handful of people were interrogated. But once the Supreme Court started putting pressure on the CBI.
So it's very clear that the key players started being interrogated only after the court really stepped in. And I think at the moment it looks like the government is sort of stepping back because it feels it's too difficult for it to try and intervene in this high profile inquiry.
Let me also add one more point. From the time between the 14th of November 2010 till the 2nd of February 2001, 14th of February, Mr. Raja was literally forced to put in his papers. A few days later, the Controller and Auditor General of India presented that famous report before the Supreme Court, wherein it said that the notional losses to the exchequer could be as high as 1,76,000 crore, which translates into close to 40 billion US dollars, making this the biggest ever scandal of its kind. Why in India, perhaps anywhere in the world? But on the 2nd of February, Mr. Raja was arrested. But remember, till this happened, in not one but 3 separate affidavits to the Supreme Court. First, by the Department of Telecommunications, represented by the Solicitor General of India, Gopal Subramaniam. Second, an affidavit given by Mr. Raja himself. It was also the CBI who had all along been arguing before the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court should not monitor the CBI's investigation. Finally, the Supreme Court, the counsel of the CBI, Mr. K.K. Venugopal, he was told that, okay, the CBI is willing to be monitored by the Supreme Court. And what was the alternative? The Supreme Court appointed a special investigating team like it has done in the Gujarat cases, the Gujarat communal rights cases. So the short point is that I do not think the government would have acted on its own. it didn't have a choice. The Supreme Court left the government with no choice, left the CBI with no choice. It had to act.
Coming back to the issue of people in trouble who've been charged. Now, the two business houses who also are supposed to be involved. One, of course, is Reliance, and that is Anil Ambani's company. While a number of his senior people are in jail, but Anil Ambani still has not been touched. Similarly, on the question of Unitech, it is believed that given all the reports that have come, the Neera Radia tapes and everything, that Tata and Unitech had a very close connection, particularly on the issue of 2G, the fact that Neera Radia was supporting Raja's induction in the cabinet, the fact that she was really lobbying for Tatas. These two houses, at least the two senior persons in this house, in the case of Tata House itself, has not yet been a part of the investigation. How do you explain this?
There are three senior executives of the ADAG, that's Anil Dhirubhai Ambani Group, who are behind bars. They happen to be Gautam Doshi, Surendra Piparia and Hari Nair. They are all very, very senior employees of the Anil Ambani Group, and they have been accused of using the group's money to fund Swan Telecom, whose ownership subsequently changed and went DB Realty Group. Now, the problem was essentially Swan Telecom. If the Anil Ambani Group had actually, there's every reason, that they funded it is hardly
public knowledge.
Is public knowledge, because
and
not only that, the CBI's charge sheet has exactly detailed how it has been done. The point was, did the Anil Dhirubhai Ambani Group have 9.9% or more than 10% of the group? Because if it has more than 10%, then Swan was not eligible to apply for the license. That is the matter. That is the criminal matter that has to be judged. But as you rightly pointed out, it is difficult to believe, and this is what Prashant Bhushan, the public interest lawyer, has also been arguing in court. It is difficult to believe that these three senior executives, Gautam Doshi, Surendra Piparia and Hari Nair, could have acted on their own without the knowledge and consent of the promoters or their bosses, which happens to be Anil Ambani. In the case of the Tatas, the situation is a little more complex. The lawyers for Shahid Balwa, who is one of the promoters of DB Realty, and Vinod Goenka have been arguing that how can the CBI say that the Tatas are not a beneficiary? Because the Tatas also jumped the queue. It's a separate matter that the Tatas feel aggrieved that others like Swan Telecom jumped the queue even more. So if the Tatas jumped the queue in front of 200 others, maybe Swan jumped the queue in front of 300 others, but that's a technical issue. I think so. This is really now, what the lawyers for Shahid Balwa and Swan Telecom, which is now DB Etisalat Telecom, are arguing that how can you say that Mr. Tata was not favoured? And they placed in the public domain, which is now Mr. Tata's letter praising Mr. Raja to Mr. Karunanidhi. And they're also trying to link what happened to a land transfer deal that happened in Chennai city involving a Tata Group company, Voltas. It was a question of leasing a particular piece of land which was in its prime urban property in Chennai. And also Mr. Raja's, the number of letters that Mr. Raja personally wrote to Mr. Ratan Tata seeking financial support for a hospital in his constituency. It's a separate matter that the money was never transferred. Just as in the case of the company, the DB Realty and Company, how they routed the funds to Kalainat TV through another company, and eventually the money was returned. But the question is, these so-called interest-free loans, were they really business transactions as the accused are claiming, or were they really quid pro quo or alleged bribes as the CBI is claiming? Now that is for the court to decide and judge.
The Tata company's role seems to be on the issue of Unitech still a little unclear. It's not clear what role they were playing.
It's very interesting, because Mr. Ratan Tata and Mr. Anil Ambani, they headed these groups. But unlike them, Sanjay Chandra, who is one of the promoters of the Unitech group, he's the managing director of the Uninor, which is the joint venture with Unitech and Telenor of Norway, is behind bars, as are people like Shahid Balwa and Vinod Goenka. Shahid Balwa is a builder who very few people knew until very recently. And then before you knew it, he was on the Forbes list of the top or among the richest people in this country.
Lot of Bombay connections and a lot of charges.
Real estate.
A lot of also question mark regarding Sharad Pawar's role vis-a-vis Shahid Balwa and so on.
Which of course predictably the Union Agriculture Minister is denying. But what's very, very interesting, and this has been documented in the CBI's charge sheet, is how funds move to create entities like Swan Telecom. And it seems that the people who were doing all these transactions, eventually they were wildlife enthusiasts, because the names of the companies are named after tiger and cheetah and swan and parrot and zebra and giraffe. I mean, these are names of companies, corporate bodies, which was very, very interestingly funneled the money and through tax havens like Mauritius. And what is very interesting is how some of these deals were structured. So you have ABC holding 50%, A company holds 50% of B company, and B company holds 50% of C company, and C company holds 50% of A company. So nobody claims to be owning the other, because you have to have 51% to own the company. I do not know if any of D company's monies were also involved in this very, very complex maze of transactions. Yeah.
Now it's very clear that at the moment the Congress is distancing itself from the DMK, and particularly Raja and Kanimori, basically saying they did it, we are really not responsible. Manmohan Singh has implicitly said coalition dharma at one point, making very clear that he knew about it, but he felt he couldn't do anything about it.
Let me make 3 or 4 observations to what you've said, which will highlight the not just why this entire scam has become such a political hot potato. Now, what has happened is, first, we know that Kanimoi, who's former Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Karunanidhi's daughter, why she's in jail. Now, she's saying she didn't have very much to do with this company, Kalaina TV, and it was really others who were running the show. But, and I say this with full responsibility, it is a fact that in 2007 and 2008, around the time this whole first come first serve system was happening and these licenses were being allotted, there is enough evidence to indicate that as a member of the Rajya Sabha, Ms. Kanimoi met with representatives of companies that gained from cheap spectrum. The question is, what was she doing meeting them, if indeed she was just one more MP of the Rajya Sabha? And one can understand why they met Mr. Raja. After all, he was the telecom minister at that point of time. I think the second point that is very important, and this has got much to do with that draft report of the Public Accounts Committee headed by Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi, which the Congress is saying that there was no consensus on that report, is the attempt to hold the finance minister of that period, Mr. Chidambaram, and the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, responsible for turning a blind eye. Now, what has happened is Mr. Raja's letters to the Prime Minister of India are in the public domain. He has apparently informed the PM of everything that was happening before it happened, including his changing the first come first serve business. So it's an interesting analogy. All along you were saying spectrum, which is a precious, scarce national resource, was being allotted in the way cinema tickets were being allotted. Now we have a different game. Okay, so you were in the queue to buy that cinema ticket, and just as you thought you were about to purchase the ticket, a couple of goons from the back take you out of the queue. He said, no, the guy behind you can buy the ticket first. So the change even in the rules of the first come first serve system, all these letters were sent to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister acknowledged these letters. Now that is not the same thing as saying the Prime Minister consented. Mr. Chidambaram's own secretary, Mr. Subbarao, who went on to become the governor of the Reserve Bank, had objected to the valuation method. The question that is being asked is, why did the Finance Ministry or the Prime Minister's office did not intervene at that stage? The Prime Minister, in his media conference, has justified his action and said that he didn't think that if indeed this had been approved by various other authorities, why he should intervene. Now, this is where the grey area has come. And this is where you're going to see a huge political battle in the Public Accounts Committee as well as the JPC, the Joint Parliamentary Committee.
Do you think that basically the argument now that is emerging is, this will really rock India's image of investments, and therefore we should forget about this big loss to the exchequer, and therefore this is okay, let that happen, let that continue, and let's just catch a few of the crooks who have done this?
The government is in a huge dilemma at this point of time. After the scam, especially after the chief of Telenor wrote to the Prime Minister saying, we are not responsible, our Indian partner did all the hanky-panky, and long before we entered the picture and we had a joint venture, all these alleged illegalities were done. So already it's very clear that foreign direct investment in telecom is on hold. For a variety of reasons. This is one reason. The tax dispute between Vodafone and the income tax department is another. But the short point is, India's image abroad has already been sullied. And those who are potential investors in the telecom department, in the telecom sector, the world's second largest telecom market after all, there are 7 phones for every 10 Indians today. There are more phones than people in many urban areas, including Delhi where we sit and talk. But that's one part of the story. That, okay, that's already happened. Now do you take action? This is, and I believe really, very honestly, again because of the pressure of the Supreme Court, and also to some extent civil society and the media, the government really doesn't have a choice. A series of show cause notices have been issued. And even if it damages the financial position of some of these telecom companies, I have a feeling they'll have to cough up the money. Because if they don't, then the system might get even more damaged.
Well, in principle, the legal proposition would be if you have illegally gotten something, then you are not entitled to it. So
That's
the
right.
only way you can legalize it by saying, okay, you pay a penalty and then remove the illegality.
You see, the whole thing is that do they get away by paying penalties and then regularizing an irregularity, or do they end up paying what are called damages? They end up paying money to the government and the exchequer for having allegedly, or if they are proved, defrauded the exchequer. This is the big legal point.
The issue there again is that CBI having filed a loss amount of 20,000 crores, it's already set the bar.
It's already it's more than 20,000 crores, it's closer to 40,000 crores. But that's far lower than what the CAG had argued, which was 1,76,000 crores. But let's assume that even if this amount of money can be recovered, that would be a huge achievement. Personally, I don't really see that happening. I think what will probably be happening is that many of these companies which have benefited from cheap spectrum and obtaining it in an illegal manner may end up paying those penalties and regularizing the irregularities. I would expect that to happen, but only time can tell what will happen or not happen.